From being a small town, first granted its charter in 1246, Wigan grew alongside many proud townships, including the neighbouring borough of Lee, until in 1974 they became one, under the title the Metropolitan Borough of Wigan, known locally as Wigan Metro, and home to some 300,000 people. This film is a nostalgic look back at the past 80 years of Wigan, Lee and the surrounding district. It is not a detailed history, but a glimpse of how the area looked to the people who lived and worked there. Much of the material has been lent by amateur filmmakers who, while taking family film, also recorded walking days and the changing landscape. This area of South Lancashire traditionally has had a reputation for high church attendance, whatever the denomination. And nowhere could this be seen better than in the traditional walking days. The Catholic Whit Walk through the centre of Wigan began in 1889, when 5 missions, Sacred Heart of Springfield, St. Joseph's, St. John's, St. Mary's and St. Patrick's joined to make the first Whit Monday walk in what was to become an annual demonstration and procession. The numerous marching bands, some from the parishes taking part, but others from neighbouring parishes and places as far away as Salford and Preston, the parish Rosebud Queens, the convent schoolgirls, nuns, priests and church members all assembled in the market square. The number attending Sunday school have been described as phenomenal, and a fraction of the churchgoers taking part in this procession filmed in the early 1960s can be seen in these extracts. Such a large gathering sits at odds with the view of John Wesley, who frequently referred to Wicked Wigan, town proverbially famous for all manner of wickedness. The procession took a route which led them via Standish Gate, Scholes, Darlington Street and Walgate back to the market square. As the procession makes its way along Standish Gate, St. John's Convent, which backed onto Central Park, the Wigan Rugby League ground, can be seen. The convent has since been demolished. The imitation Tudor frontages to these shops were added in the 1920s and now add the distinctive character to Wigan town centre, a 20s equivalent of stone cladding. Not everybody was interested in the parade. When you've seen one marching band, you've seen them all. The redevelopment of the town centre area to accommodate the new shopping centre, the galleries and the new market hall has meant there is no longer a large town centre assembly point for such an enormous parade of faith. not all the walks were taking place in Wigan. St Thomas and All Saints churches in Lee combined for their own walking day through the parishes. Local bands led the parade through the heart of the parishes so that parishioners only had to come to their own front doors. Some processions were to celebrate First Communions. This family film, taken at St Joseph's, Lee, showed what an important day this was in the life of the church. The self-conscious boys and girls were assembled in the churchyard for the parade. It was altogether a much more solemn occasion than the razzmatazz of the big procession through Wigan town centre. Whether the local walking day took place at Whitsuntide, on Trinity Sunday, or later in the church year, it was always an excuse for the local bands to put on a good display. The locals say that this walking day in Downall Green was always rounded off with a slap-up tea with jelly on the menu. Hence, it was always known as Jelly Sunday. The 60s were the heydays of church walks. Ashton Free Churches held their parade through the middle of Ashton in Makerfield. The camera work may be less than professional, but you can still feel the goosebumps on this blustery day. The Downall Green First Communion brought out the entire congregation in support. After the photographer had finally managed to line up the children for a commemorative picture, the procession set off through Our Lady's parish. Over at St Mark's in Newtown, Wigan, the walk was always held on Trinity Sunday and was Children's Day. There were the obligatory marching bands and lots of boys and girls carrying banners or just plain marching. But it was the formidable army of ladies who took the eye as they proudly marched through the streets. The 50s fashion for full-skirted summer dresses worn over several petticoats was also much in evidence. The secret to maintaining the look was to dip the skirts in a sugar and water solution. This could be a bit sticky if they got wet. St Mark's Church still holds walking days, but these shots, taken in 1959 and 1960, reflect the enthusiasm of those times, ending with a vast open-air service to close the proceedings. Mining played a very important part in the economic development of the area. About the 1850s, mining began to move out eastwards, and by 1901, Lee's population had trebled. The men coming out of the cage as they finished their shift at Bickershaw Colliery in 1920 managed to ignore the camera's presence, but the young boys patiently allowed themselves to be shuffled around. However, not everyone found work in the mines. In the post-1914-18 war years, unemployment was a problem for some men. They staged marches to catch the eye of policymakers in the town. However, the shoppers in Lee open-air market seemed to be taking it all in their stride. Women and children worked underground until the 1842 Coal Mines Regulation Act. From then on, pit-brow lasses worked above ground, riddling and shoveling coal into wagons and barges. Some were reported to have worked for over 50 years at this back-breaking work. A major contribution to the safety in mines has been made by a Wigan firm. Under various names over the years, Longwall International have been associated with Wigan, making equipment for use underground since the 1920s. Perhaps their best-known name locally was Gullix. In the 1960s, the massive Seaman Works was opened. The 875,000 square foot site housed manufacturing, assembly, stores, development and machine shops, plus all the usual services. The company has pioneered the longwall systems in mines all over the globe. It was they, in fact, who installed the USSR's first bank control system to cope with inclined coal faces. As the Wigan coal industry began to decline, the company was developing its worldwide international reputation. Garswood Colliery closed in the late 50s. A legacy of the coal industry were the spoil heaps. The Three Sisters, or the Wigan Alps as they were ironically known, were a major feature of the landscape. From the top of these 50 meters high mounds, you had a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. Reclamation work in the 60s and 70s have transformed the area. Thousands of trees and shrubs have been planted and an arena built, which is used for karting and motorcycle events. It also has a landscaped lake, which is popular with windsurfers, canoeists and model boat enthusiasts. But as the mines closed, the diggers arrived in Gin Pit village in the early 80s. Gin Pit was used as the location for the 70s Granada TV series, Sam. It was chosen because its appearance had hardly changed from the pre-war period. Now the cobbles were ripped up and the roads and pavements relaid. The first shaft was reported sunk in 1872. And when one of the oldest houses gave way to the demolition hammers, it was just one more symbol of the change in the economy and the appearance of the area. Cinema steps in Lee looked suspiciously busy. The staff were being filmed by the Lee Pictorial News to appear on a local newsreel. The same company also filmed a Lee Northern Union League match between Lee and Halifax at their Mather Lane ground. The BICC Tower was built later in the rugby field. The rugby team moved to their present home, Hilton Park, after the war ended in 1945. Rugby league has been the major sport in the area, and Lee and Tyldesley and their neighbour Wigan were among the founders of the Northern Union, which broke away from the Rugby Union in 1895 so that players could be paid for time lost from work. In 1921, Lee were to beat Halifax in the Challenge Cup final at Broughton Park. Thus, it was reported, breaking the Yorkshire stranglehold on the Challenge Cup. Going to the pictures was a major tradition. In the days before television, it was one of the most popular pastimes. In the 30s, Lee cinemagoers were told where to go to get electricity installed. Lots of homes at that time still had gas lighting. The major form of transport was the bicycle. At this time, you could buy wine by having your own bottle filled from the wood. But this wine and spirit merchant bottled his own drinks. Radios sold were often of the accumulator type, and you had to take them back to the shop to be recharged. While tucking into your toffees, you could dream of buying a house. A 3-bedroomed house would set you back about £350, or you could get one on easy terms. The show house was furnished in the latest style, with a fully fitted kitchen being a major feature. Even food shops, such as this fruit and vegetable shop, recognized the worth of this new advertising medium. Galvin's not only advertised their bread, but their up-to-date equipment, which mixed the dough and, after baking them, sliced and wrapped the loaves. Shopping for clothes had a different style from today. No communal cubicles then, but instead personal service from a sales assistant. The fashions were elegant, and you could buy all you needed, including the hat, under one roof. Similar types of advertisements were on at the Pemberton cinemas in the late 1940s. Meat was probably a treat for many families in Wigan, but the habit of husband and wife calling each other Mr. and Mrs. is a potent indication of a bygone era. W.F. Heaton, as Heatons of Pemberton, were in business until 1995. Department stores were the norm in the 40s, but an indication that the war was still taking its toll came in ads which pointed out that they were doing their best despite the shortage of supplies. Beauty was a cruel business for those in pursuit of it. A permanent wave meant being wired up to a fearsome electrical contraption. And you could have a 2-digit telephone number, a reminder that things we take for granted were rare 50 years ago. Wartime cinema trips were also enlivened with a little government propaganda. As there is no soundtrack, these flashes look as if they're suggesting that you could try catching your own fish as salt cod was going to be a scarce commodity. There was an exhortation not to waste water. 5 inches of water was the recommended depth for a bath, and the public were told that that was all they used in Buckingham Palace. Neighbours were asked to save fuel by sharing a fireside during wartime. They would also have to remember to keep blackout curtains drawn while doing so. By the 1960s, cinemas were being closed. The Majestic in Tyldesley closed to be transformed into swimming baths. In 1935, there were almost 40 cinemas in the area. Even in the 50s, the Wigan Observer used to carry a full page of advertisements showing what was on at the cinema. The first mention of cinema performances in Wigan were at the Drill Hall in 1906. The former roller skating rink, the Pavilion, was showing USA films in 1910. It had a seating capacity of 5,000. Cinema managers had to develop all-round skills as front of house and projectionists. When the film had finished and the customers were making their way home, he would be rewinding the film and inspecting it for damage. Meanwhile, the cinemas were facing an increasing threat from television. The building and opening of the M6 in the 1960s put Wigan in the heart of a road and rail network, which has helped to attract businesses and industries to move into the area. Fields which had formerly been happy hunting grounds for children were taken over by the heavy diggers. Rarely can the M6 have looked so empty since its opening, however. Wigan Metro is an area of contrasts. Ashton in Makerfield, with the A49 running through it, has changed little in the last 30 years. It still has a thriving open-air market, even in the rain. It has an imposing library which straddles the junction between the A49 and the old road through the township. Continuing up Wigan Road, a local landmark is the Park Hotel at Bryn, with the old post office, a listed building, and now a cottage, sitting alongside. The parish church stands at the heart of the town centre in Wigan, amid peaceful gardens. 13th century foundations were rebuilt extensively in 1847, but parts of the tower are original. There are 16 fine parks in the area. Mains Park often takes visitors to Wigan by surprise. Situated very near the town centre, it was laid out in 1878. It is a traditional park which has flower beds, grassed areas, secluded lake, a children's playground and a bowling green. Lee too has its parks. This one at Pennington is famous for its bowling green. Mains Park has its attractions in winter, provided you keep moving. The Rylands Mill looms at the north end of the park. The mill is now part of Wigan and Lee College. The Country Park at Hay Hall is a venue at the centre of many of the area's leisure pursuits. Groups of scouts here were taking part in competitions in the large grounds. Motorists who have fumed at the notorious bottleneck at the Saddle near the fire station and the Asda supermarket will recognise this area of Wigan, where the roads lead to Pemberton and St Helens. Just before reorganisation in 1974, the local Cine Club took a record of many of the changes taking place in Wigan. A lot of demolition work was taking place in the Scholes area to make way for roads and new development. The long rows of terraced houses were cleared and the cobble streets taken up, and new shopping units were already taking shape. The development went on to include a ring road around the edge of Wigan. The open-air market spilled out over the market square in front of the Victorian Market Hall. The redevelopment plan, including the new shopping centre, the galleries, together with a new market hall and a more compact open-air market, are familiar sights to the present-day visitor to Wigan. Hay Country Park is one of Lancashire's natural playgrounds for locals and visitors alike. The 19th century hall has a long and colourful history and is now used for conferences and weddings. The current Hay Hall was built between 1827 and 1840, mainly using locally quarried stone. The extensive plantations were laid out in the 1860s to give work to unemployed Wiganers during the cotton famine caused by the American Civil War. There are over 250 acres of woods, gardens and rolling parkland enjoyed by the public today. The Wigan International Pool was built on the site of the Pavilion Cinema. It made an excellent venue for the English schools competition. The home of Wigan Wasps, many swimmers who have represented England and Great Britain have trained there. Perhaps the most famous was June Croft, who was born in Ashton in Makerfield, and in addition to holding the British freestyle record and being champion, she won 3 Commonwealth gold medals and holds Olympic silver and bronze. King George V and Queen Mary visited Lee in July 1913, just 14 years after the town achieved borough status. It was part of a week-long tour of Lancashire. They travelled by train and Daimler and stayed each night at Knowsley with the Earl of Derby. The King and Queen were due to arrive in Lee at 5 p.m. As the car was passing through Tyldesley, the school children, who were officially on holiday, assembled at school and then were allocated places at the roadside to see the royal couple pass by. The children in Lee were to assemble in 3 rows, infants at the front, juniors in the middle, and seniors at the back. Boys on one side of the road and girls on the other. The local civic dignitaries, including the Mayor and Mayoress, were presented to the King and Queen on a specially erected platform placed in front of the 4-year-old town hall. At 5:32 p.m, the couple left to go to Westley Station on their way to Knowsley. In 1954, all Wigan awaited the arrival of the young Queen Elizabeth and her handsome husband, Prince Philip. The Lord Lieutenant of Lancaster, the Earl of Derby, was on hand to make the presentations to the Queen, which included the Mayor and Mayoress of Wigan, Councillor and Mrs. T.S. Merry. The Countess of Derby was also there, wearing her much-admired mink coat. The train arrived 5 minutes early. The Queen, on the first day of her royal tour of Lancashire, was there to open the John McCurdy Hall at Wigan Mining and Technical College in Parsons Walk. Some of the crowd had been in place since 6:30 a.m. Business life was suspended for an hour. 10,000 children cheered and 4,000 mill girls were given time off to see the Queen. Before opening the hall, the Queen inspected a guard of honour, the Duke of Lancaster's own yeomanry, Royal Armoured Corps TA, and the chairmen of neighbouring local councils were presented to her. The building was named after Alderman John McCurdy, a former chairman of Wigan Education Committee. It was designed to allow for further extension vertically and cost £320,000. It boasted 14 classrooms, engineering and mining mechanical engineering workshops, laboratories, and a large separate gymnasium. As the Queen and the Duke were driven away towards St Helens, their next port of call, the crowd surged forward for one last glimpse. This brief hark back to distant memories ends where it began, with a policeman on point duty. It is over 20 years since a policeman stood on point duty in the town centre and waved the traffic and pedestrians on or asked them to stay put. The one-way system and ring roads have taken the heavy traffic away, and only a major incident would bring back police officers to direct traffic. nostalgic look only covers events filmed by its contributors. So there's been no mention of the pier and the awful jokes which usually accompany its mention. The sporting exploits of Wigan Rugby League Club, Wigan Athletic Football Club and Orrell Rugby Union Club continue to make the headlines, but not in this film. Wigan Metro is an ever-changing and developing commercial centre. Old industries of mining and textiles decline, but new industries are attracted into its many new industrial estates. But that is another story.